In this presentation of 9.3, we're going to go over the 9.3 guided reading worksheet. So again, the essential questions are here, and you can stop the presentation and look at those, but we're going to draw our attention to basically that first part of the section where it talks about Americans in foreign seas is where it's going to start. Alright, so imagine if a foreign government had been demanding money from the United States to pass by their shores, and the United States had been paying that for the past two presidents. Then the foreign government has now raised the amount of money they want from the United States. What should the United States do? And so I always pose this because this is a real life event. When George Washington and John Adams were our presidents, they paid the money from the Barbary Coast pirates that demanded what they referred to as tribute. They felt it was easier to pay the money than to raise the amount of money necessary to have a well-outfitted navy. But when Jefferson was president, he decides that he is not going to pay the increase, and he is going to dispatch a squadron of ships into the Mediterranean to actually blockade the port of Tripoli. So here's our guided reading worksheet. So I broke it into three different parts. Okay, so here we go. This is the first part. So in Americans in Foreign Seas, it says by the 1800, the United States is the first one. Okay, the United States had almost 1,000 merchant ships trading around the world. And when Jefferson refused to pay the money for protection of American ships in the Mediterranean, the ruler of Tripoli, is the way we say that, Tripoli, chopped down the flagpole of the American consulate. And then in 1804, this man, Stephen Decatur, that's why I put his picture right over his name, slipped into Tripoli harbor, and he burned the Philadelphia, I put it right underneath its picture, to prevent the Barbary pirates from using it. So hopefully you had read this in the book, but what happened in late 1803, one of those ships that was part of the blockade duty was the USS Philadelphia, and it had run aground. And what happened is the Barbary pirates kind of surrounded it, took the crew hostage, and then hoped to turn that ship into part of their navy. The United States commander there got this guy, Stephen Decatur, and about 70 to 80 Marines who quietly slipped into Tripoli harbor, overpowered the crew, and lit the ship on fire and got away. So it was a very daring act, and it was important for America not to allow one of its ships to fall into enemy hands. This next screen will just sort of show you some of those things. Of the Philadelphia running aground, and then here you have the U.S. Marines and sailors assault the ship, and here you have Stephen Decatur, very much written about and talked about action that occurred there. So more pictures of the burning of the Philadelphia. Alright, so moving on to the second part, freedom of the seas. So in the war between Great Britain and France, the United States had what they believed was neutral rights. That's the right to sail the seas and not take sides in a conflict. But in need of sailors, British naval patrol stopped American ships and impressed thousands of American citizens into service. So this would be an example of impressment. So these would be the British, these would be Americans. You can sort of see they're pretty much just being kidnapped and forced to serve on British ships. Same thing up here. Okay. All right, getting back to this. So when the British attacked and the answer to that one is the Chesapeake, right here, in June of 1807, many Americans called for war against Great Britain. So here's what the Chesapeake looked like. And what had happened is that another ship called the HMS Leopard fired on the USS Chesapeake off the coast of Virginia. And so it caused an international incident and got the Americans really to the point of war, but they held back because Jefferson wanted to keep Americans out of any kind of conflict, especially internationally. So instead, Congress passes the Embargo Act. That's number 8. Okay, the Embargo Act was the act that banned all imports and all exports to all foreign countries. It was supposed to hurt France and Britain. It actually ended up hurting the Americans and actually hurt the area of New England hardest. And that is also political because most of New England was filled with the opposition party, Federalists. So 2 years later, he has the Congress draw up a different law known as the Non-Intercourse Act, and passed on March 1809, prohibited trade just with Great Britain and just with France. but that really didn't work either. So now we finish up with the last part. So not only are we having issues internationally, so it says when good old James Madison takes office in 1809, remember Jefferson steps down, cries for war growing stronger and louder. So number 11 is when Napoleon, okay, here he is, tricked the United States when he promised to end France's trade restrictions. So the whole issue is going on is Britain and France are at war in Europe, and we also have issues with items on the frontier. So Madison, aware of the growing power of the Shawnee brothers, who are Tecumseh, that's Tecumseh right here, and the Prophet, who was his brother, that's him right here, the American governor of Indiana Territory, William Henry Harrison, it's right here, feared a Native American alliance with the British. So what he feared was these two Indians working together with the British could stop American movement in the West. And so what he does is he plans to attack the settlement of these various Indian confederacies and societies, and that's going to be later with the Battle of Tippecanoe. So on June 1st, 1812, Madison goes before Congress and asks for a declaration of war. So that's how this one wraps up.